We begin with major breaking news tonight. A Nashville judge has blocked the National Guard deployment in Memphis, but gave Governor Lee's team 5 days to appeal. Thank you for joining us for Action News 5 at 10 tonight. I'm Joyce Peterson in for Joy Redmond. The judge's ruling coming a short time ago on the lawsuit that Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris and other Democratic leaders filed to stop the deployment of the troops, saying it's illegal. Mayor Harris contends Governor Bill Lee cannot deploy the Tennessee National Guard for civil unrest unless there is a rebellion or invasion. The ruling comes just days after the Guard doubled the amount of troops in the Bluff City. Tonight, Mayor Harris tells Action News 5 he's pleased that the court has issued a favorable decision on our motion for a temporary injunction in joining the National Guard deployment in Memphis. He goes on to say this is a positive step toward ensuring the rule of law applies to everyone, including everyday Tennesseans and even the governor. We're also hearing tonight from the Shelby County Republican Party about the ruling to block the deployment of the Guard. Vice Chair Luke Simbel says this is a bad decision by a Democratic chancellor, and we are confident it will be overturned on appeal. Democrats are intent on opposing Republicans' efforts to clean up crime in Memphis. Mayor Harris mentioned the additional costs of the federal surge as part of the reason why Shelby County government faces a huge $43 million budget deficit right now. Reduced revenue, lower property tax collections, and hefty pay raises also blamed for the shortfall. Now, earlier tonight, the Shelby County Commission voted to take out a loan from the county's debt service fund to keep the government running. In a letter last month, Mayor Harris detailed the costs of the Memphis Safe Task Force, pointing out food, bedding, clothing, and other essentials that individuals would need to stay in jail. The letter was written to state leaders in a request to get 2 extra judges to address the growing caseload. He also pointed to court proceeding costs, including additional prosecutors, public defenders, sheriff's deputies, and other court personnel needed. Now, the Guard, this is separate from the task force, arrived in October with the plan to deploy more troops this past weekend, bringing the total amount of troops in town past 300. Again, Governor Lee has 5 days to appeal the judge's decision to block the deployment of the troops before the troops have to move out of town. We reached out to Governor Lee's office for comment. We have not heard back yet. And again, this ruling does not apply to the federal agents who make up the Memphis Safe Task Force, only to the National Guard.